our next speaker, Colin. He's a senior developer advocate at Discord. He's helping developers build immersive experiences through great documentation and thoughtful developer tools. With a background in API design and community building, he's passionate about making complex systems approachable. You can find him trail running, camping, or plotting D&D heists when he's away from the computer. Open docs, open collaboration, building better documentation with community PRs. Colin Loretz, everyone.
Awesome, thank you. Today we're going to be diving into what it really means to open your documentation to public contributions. Opening your docs changes the way that you build for developers, for your users, and it really creates a unique relationship in terms of creating a relationship of co-creation and co-ownership. So today I'm going to be sharing some of the benefits of writing the docs in the open, opening your documentation to the world, and how to build a developer ecosystem that grows stronger with every commit. But first, as you just heard, my name is Colin. I'm a developer advocate at Discord. I really help to bridge the gap between our engineering teams and the developers that we serve. So some days that means the docs, some days that means writing code samples. And today our docs are open source, public, and built with, not just for, our community. So all of the pages that we manage, we get about 30 to 50 public PRs a month, or just 30 to 50 PRs a month. More than half of those come from our actual developer community. So let's break it down a little bit. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about our current docs and why they're open, why you might want to consider opening your docs. What's really interesting is that Discord itself, we are not an open source product, but we still have an open documentation set just because we want to try to build in public as much as we can. And we want to talk about the tools that we use, how we manage those contributions, and how to work towards really hosting a healthy contributor culture. And along the way, we had some stumbles, so I'm going to share those as well. We're going to share some of the things that we learned the hard way and really kind of set you up if this is a journey that you're wanting to take so that you can kind of skip some of those stumbles yourself and put your best foot forward. So our docs today are a public GitHub repo. This talk is going to skew GitHub, but everything I talk about today can be done regardless of what tech stack or vendor you use. Even if your documentation is all internal, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are still just good things that you could adopt as a team. Maybe your users, developers are within your own company, so you can still apply a lot of these things to that. So our docs are smaller than some of the docs that we've heard about this week. They're about 200 markdown files. That includes our reference, our guides, tutorials, and other learning materials. Everything's in Markdown. We use MDX, and everything is very bespoke and hand-built today. And so we're just kind of looking at what other platforms we can use to extend that. And so GitHub Actions is a thing that we use a lot for things like link checking, table linting, and then we've been exploring how can we add style guide checking and things like that as well. And so our docs actually exist in an infinite multiverse of SDKs. Our developer community is amazing. Third-party developers build and maintain over 60 community libraries across over 20 languages, and they very much rely on our documentation for knowing what features to support in their SDKs. So these SDKs are used for building chatbots in Discord, if you've seen them in a community server, things like moderation bots, games, really just any sorts of ways that people want to interact with Discord. We also offer 3 official SDKs that are more focused on our gaming products, and so we actually have very much different types of documentation for depending on what developers are building. Today, and then we're going to get into this more in our lessons learned, but our reference docs are largely handwritten, and we're moving towards a generated reference future with that. So let's take a look at an example. So here's a PR that we just had actually just a couple weeks ago for a feature called Components v2. So components are a way that developers can send a message to a server and design it and customize it so that you can have like different images and buttons and things like that. And for a long time, developers had been asking for more features in our components. And so a big part of developer relations is listening to that feedback and bringing it back to engineering teams and figuring out what we can do to make that better. And so we actually rolled out Components v2, and part of that is our documentation can be updated by our team or by the community. And in this case, one of our team members opened a PR with the documentation for Components v2. And then off on the side, we have a whole bunch of community contributors who are helping to review. And we had around 60 comments on this one in particular. And what's interesting about our relationship with the SDK developers is that when something is merged, that means that they can rely on it, that means it's stable. Oftentimes, our product teams are working on experimental APIs, and we don't want people putting those into their SDKs until we know that experiment has been proven, and we're going to ship it and make it available to those developers. So in this case, this one was merged. And if we scroll down the page to GitHub, we actually see a couple of the SDK developers had made PRs to their own SDKs referencing these docs. So there's a little bit of a dance where as we start to document things, the community kind of flocks around it, pokes at it, tries things, finds edge cases, gives us feedback about things that may or may not be kind of ground truth. Some of that is because we don't have generated reference, right? And so we'll talk about that more. But some of it too is that when you build like code samples and you do a tutorial, you can only teach what you might teach in like a small getting started guide. Some of these bot developers are operating at a scale of a bot in millions of servers. And so some of the things that they see day to day are just things that only developers of that scale are going to see. And so for us, being able to open our documentation means that we have this build in public co-creation with our developer community. We get instant feedback from those developers about something that's either very much a win with Components v2, whole bunch of ta-da emojis once that PR went open. But then we also get the other feedback of, hey, this doesn't quite work the way that we expect, or it doesn't match the other APIs. And so we want to take that feedback in as much as possible. So again, our product isn't open source, so opening the docs allows us to build in the open as much as we can and co-create with our developer community. Let's go on to what does open mean here? So that means that we have a public repo. Again, you could do this in GitLab, Bitbucket, really whatever tools you're using. We use GitHub because it is the place where most people are already hanging out. And it does not mean that you can open up your docs and hope for free labor, right? You cannot just expect that the community is going to take care of your docs and you can stop resourcing it. It means that when you open this up, you're committing yourself to a process and an intention of what does it mean to build with our community. We have to show up just as much as our developer community shows up. So at Discord, we learned that the community was more than willing to show up, but we have to meet them halfway. So most of the time when we talk about our docs are out in the open, a lot of people have a little bit of a pause, right? There's some challenges to consider here, some things to think about. You might wonder, what if someone breaks something? What if the writing quality doesn't match what's in the existing docs? And these are real concerns, but we found that clear automation, thoughtful contribution guidelines, and a strong review process can handle most of these challenges. So what you get in return, again, like I was mentioning, is that bots working at scale are giving us feedback constantly. We get the insight from those developers, and we build a relationship with our community. So you can kind of start to think about opening your docs like you would host a party. So what does your invitation look like? How do developers know that they can come to contribute to the docs? How do guests know where to go? When does the party start? And what can they expect when they get there? And so if we're hosting a party, we want to make sure that we get ready for our guests. And that means having a very clear contributing markdown file in your repo. This has step-by-step instructions on kind of the rules of engagement, what things someone can expect if they're going to be contributing to your project. You can create templates for both pull requests and issues, and you can create different types of templates. So if you're looking for a bug report or a feedback request, you can create different types of templates to kind of guide people along the way. And then if you're concerned about style guides, we're going to talk about some automation, but you can also publish clear writing guidelines. A big thing here is like we don't necessarily want someone to come in and reorganize all of the docs or reframe a whole topic, but we do want to get that feedback. Maybe it's just that we ended up with a typo or a field was missing from the API, and so being able to take that feedback is very important. And then structuring your repo is just as important. So you want to make sure that it's very clear where the docs, in our case, they're marked down, what folders, what files are serving up which pages, and allow when someone creates a pull request to tag their pull request or issue with a label. Let your contributors help you in that process to just make sure everything is ready. We do get often PRs that have no descriptions, right? And so that is a fail if we don't necessarily know, okay, you changed a bunch of things, but why? What did you do to reproduce this, and how is it affecting your development flow? Merged PRs are also a really good way to kind of give people a model to follow because they can go see this is an example of what good looks like. And just like hosting a party, your first party does not need to be a rager. You can start small. You don't need to open the floodgates all at once. If you can start by opening up your FAQs or your tutorials, just see what happens, improve the process, and then you can expand from there. So let's get a little tactical. We've got some tools and workflows, things that help to plan and host your party. These are just going to be some things that make sure that everybody has a good time. So you really want to make sure that you get your review workflow down, and there's going to be two parts to this. There are some things that robots are very good about. We've heard about a lot of really good AI tools this week. So you want to use automated checks for things that computers are really good at. Things like spelling, link checking, markdown tables. We have something that formats all of our markdown tables so they're all exactly the width that they need to be. That's a job that fails frequently, and there's always little memes and jokes about how the tables didn't format properly. But you want to do those things so that you can save the brain power for human review, so that when a human does review it, whether it's from our community or from our team, that we can check for accuracy, tone, technical things that may be not as easily tested by a bot. And some of the tools that you might use for some of those automated processes are going to be things like style rule checking with things like Veil, or checking for inconsistent or inconsiderate language with Alex. And then there are many different link checkers depending on what your tool chain is. I put two up on the screen there that are just known as very fast link checkers. So a big part of this too is that as many things as you want to add to your repos, you want to make sure that they're fast so that people can get quick feedback rather than opening a PR, leaving, and then just hoping that everything went green after they left. And that was the wrong button. Let's push that again. There we go. Okay. So again, we lean pretty heavily on GitHub, and the tools that they offer in pull requests are super useful if you use them. If you've ever opened a GitHub pull request, it's really easy to just kind of open it, walk away from it, hope that someone accepts it, maybe there's some conversation. But we rely on GitHub branch protection and review assignments. So we have GitHub teams set up, we have a DevRel team, we have different teams for each engineering team. And it's really nice because on the DevRel team, we kind of round robin assign each new PR to a different DevRel so that one person doesn't have to review all of the PRs. If you're working on a product where specific people in the company or specific writers have a specific skill set, you can use a code owners file to define certain folders. So this is an example here, /docs would get automatically tagged to the documentation team. Anything in the source directory would be assigned to the dev team. And you can do this all the way down to markdown files, JavaScript files, anything that you can do in that glob star pattern, you can actually assign to different teams or different individuals, including email addresses, which is really nice. So use those so that you don't have to, again, have everything going to one person and having somebody triage every single pull request. And then GitHub Copilot has released the ability for AI to do pull requests reviews on your pull requests. We have used this on code. We have not used this on the docs yet. So if you do this, I would be curious to hear how it goes. But this is, again, going to be something where depending on what your docs are representing, do you want to trust the AI to be reviewing your docs, or do you want a human to be doing that? Lean on notifications. So we use a Discord bot because we're Discord. We have a lot of internal bots that notify us when things are either a new pull request has been opened, a conversation's being had somewhere in one of the GitHub issues, so that we can show up and respond to it. We want to avoid ghosting our contributors because they've come to the party, they're here to contribute and make the docs better for everybody because they themselves had some sort of issue. And so you want to be able to either use, Slack has a GitHub app, you can use webhooks from GitHub to send it into other tools that you might be using, but really lean into the tools that GitHub gives you and or whatever other vendor you might be using. The big thing here is that you want to make sure that we get to the right human so that humans can eventually review and then close those PRs as quickly as possible. So most public docs, if you've ever looked at open source projects or if you go look at ours, they're all in Markdown. And when you make large changes to Markdown files without any sense of like what does it look like, it can be pretty challenging. And so preview links are a game changer here. A lot of the docs platforms have this built in, but if you have a more bespoke system set up, you can use things like Cloudflare Pages, which is what we use, or you can use even GitHub Pages has a built-in option for this. So you can have previews per branch, allowing your contributors to actually see what the changes are that they're submitting. And then also in GitHub, there is a tab called Insights. It doesn't tell you a lot, but if you want to just get a sense of how many PRs, how many contributors do we have, it's a really good place to start. And if you're trying to be a little bit more metrics driven, there are tools like OSS Insight that will help you to kind of dial in metrics around how well are you doing. If you need to go tell a team, whether it's your managers or someone up the chain, like how well are we doing? There's going to be the more vanity metrics of around lines of code, lines of docs, number of PRs. But the more interesting thing is like how long does it take from a PR being opened till when it's closed? And that's a big one because the longer that they're open, the more merge conflicts that can happen, the more the product might have changed since the document was changed. And so you want to make sure that you have a sense of what is the average time that it takes for us to close a PR. But then you also want to look for patterns of very specific, like is everyone opening a PR for the exact same thing every time we launch a new feature? If so, there's probably something in your process that you need to go reevaluate, either on your team or even on the product team. It's possible the product is too hard to use, it may not be easy to use, and therefore the documentation is really hard to write because it's just a challenging product to use. And so that's stuff you can take back to your team to show value around just the developer community, the user community, whatever it might be, is having issues with the docs and extensively with the product itself. So we've definitely learned a lot. We've learned a lot the hard way, and so we want to share some of those things with everyone today. A big takeaway for us is that we really there was a period of time where we let community PRs sit unreviewed for just way too long. That still persists today. It's something that we're working through actively, but this really did lead to frustration and missed opportunities from the community because when someone takes the time to open a PR, they're spending some of their own personal time to do that, and if you don't follow through and meet them halfway, they're not going to do it again. And so a big takeaway for us is that if you open the door, if you're going to host the party, you need to be ready to host, guide, and collaborate with your community. You really can't do this halfway. You kind of have to commit to it, or you have to set expectations very clearly. You can define, like, we only take contributions to this part of the docs, and we'll get to it in a second, but a big one there would be maybe a tutorial's out of date, maybe a getting started guide's out of date, but we don't take changes to our reference documentation. So opening your docs does not absolve your team of responsibility. It does not mean free labor. It means that your team actually has more responsibility and responsibility to your community who's helping you along that way. So progress over perfection is a big one. That's why I wanted to share that story about the docs the PRs being open for too long, Because for us, this is also one of our company principles. We have learned a lot, but we know we're not going to be perfect at this. Our job here is not to get to inbox 0, but we know that we cannot continue to have PRs being open for multiple months at a time. We actually have a few that are even like from 2022. And so our goal there is we want to stay on top of the PRs that we have today, any of the new ones, and then our team is going back and closing the older ones as we can so that we can start to get rid of that tech debt. Like I said before, the issue with those old and aging PRs is that the whole product from 2022 to now, a lot has changed. And so it's not as easy to go read that PR and see like, okay, we're just going to merge this, because we need to go find out what team worked on that feature. Is this still truth in the product? Should we merge this? Who worked on it? And then hopefully there's not a giant merge conflict and get on top of that. And so this is one where, again, aim for progress over perfection, but then setting clear expectations is going to be a really big one for knowing, like, if I open this PR today, how long is it going to take before I actually see a response from a team and eventually having that be landed. So setting clear expectations. This one goes to what content do you want contributions to. You can use the code owners file. You can use GitHub Actions to define like, hey, thank you for this PR, but we don't take contributions to this section of the docs. And in doing so, you really do want to think through, like, if we're only taking contributions to this small part, like, is opening our docs worth it? That's going to be up to you and your team to decide. But if you do say, you know what, we're going to open the doors, we're going to have a party in the docs, then you, again, have to be ready to host that party as well. So you want to set those clear expectations. If we're going back to our party metaphor, like, who else will be there? What time does it start? And is there going to be food? Do I need to bring something along with me when I make that contribution? You want to make sure that that's abundantly clear. Opening your first PR to a public project like this can be really scary. So anything you can do to just help leave people's anxiety at the door can go a really long way. I know before working at Discord, when I would open a PR or work on my own personal projects, like, you push something out to the internet and like nothing happens. With Discord, when we push something to the PR, like, people show up almost instantly, like emojis and comments just start kind of funneling in. And so anything you can do to just make that not a stressful experience is always a good thing. We also have a Discord community where a lot of these contributors are also discussing and talking about just Discord development in general. And so if you have forums or Slack communities, Discord community, whatever that is, it's a really good place to really just give them a place to hang out and continue the PR party, essentially. So you want to automate the automatable. We talked about this a little bit. The big one for us, the big elephant in the room for our docs, is that we need to automate and generate our reference docs. A lot of our PRs are things that would not need to be PR'd if we generated our reference docs. And so to that end, with our goal of getting those generated, we can then focus on our community helping us with guides, tutorials, the stuff that really helps people build something. And then we can just know that the reference is in its place. When engineers change something, the reference will get updated with it. On the other side of it, it doesn't feel good to have a human nitpicking at formatting, spelling, or wording if we could use a bot for that as well. And so if you can find that your style guide can be used in Veil or any of those other tools, then it's also great to have someone open a PR and then receive these little helpful suggestions from a bot instead of having a human come in and say, you know, like, oh, this isn't exactly what we're looking for, and you know, you don't necessarily want to get shut down by a person. And the bot can kind of be a nice way to kind of keep that going. So again, that can be useful for linting, style checking, notifications, anything that, again, doesn't necessarily need to be checking your, like, for technical accuracy. So hosting matters. So we want to automate the automatable, but we do not want to get rid of the human element from opening your docs, right? You don't want to host a party, put the food out, and then just go away. You need to start the party and be part of the party. And so in the case of API docs, your users are relying on your docs to do their job. Maybe they're using it to build their own product. And so they rely on your service in a very live way. And so you need to be able to follow up and make sure that they can get their job done. Maybe in the process of building their new product, they again find an edge case at a scale of a bot that is just much larger than what we work with, and then they can help improve the product for themselves and for all future developers. So a big part of what does hosting look like for a party? Well, in this case, it's going to be actively triaging and managing those PRs as they come in. If you can't deal with it, if you can't merge it like at that moment, maybe you get a new PR right as you're logging off for the day, acknowledging it and saying, thank you, we're going to get to this. You know, our team has a lot going on right now. This is going to get in the queue. If you can sync your GitHub issues to an issue tracker, your PRs to an issue tracker, that can also help to do assignment on that end. And then you want to build feedback loops. So having your docs in the open is already inviting feedback, both through issues, discussions, and for PRs. But you also want to make it very clear. Like today, if you go to our docs, you kind of have to be a part of our community to know that our docs are open. And so one of the things we're exploring is actually adding a prompt at the end of every page that asks, did you find what you were looking for, yes or no? And if it's yes, then cool, we love to hear that, right? If it's not, how can we invite you to open that issue, create the PR, or contact our developer support? And that way, we can actually start to get some metrics around the pages that we've been writing, the community has been helping us with, are accomplishing the goal of helping developers build things on our platform, or we can realize really quickly, like these pages are not performing as well, we have a whole bunch of PRs, and the good thing is the community is identifying why they couldn't find what they were looking for, which can be a lot more helpful than just, no, couldn't find what I was looking for, went to Google, right? Those kinds of things can just be a dead end to the party. So we want to build with instead of for. So our community often knows our product better than we do. We may build the API endpoints, we may build the sample code, but again, a lot of these bot developers are operating at a huge scale. They see things that only developers like them are going to see because their bot is in millions of servers. And so that is extremely valuable information that we can't just simulate on our team. We can make sure that the API works. We can make sure the API has generated reference, but we want to be able to bring them along with the journey. So when we say building with, not for, sometimes we have to keep a feature secret because it's a marketing or a press launch. But if it's not, how can we invite our community early to join us in like a beta feedback group, give them access to the feature early, and we did that with the Components v2 feature. So the engineer who worked on that, they created a new Discord server, they invited a bunch of the bot developers, they invited a bunch of the SDK developers in there, they gave them access to the feature early. We then essentially co-wrote the documentation with the community. The community tested the Components v2 every which way they could possibly think. The engineering team evolved the product in that process, and then the eventual docs that we showed at the beginning of this talk were what we ended up publishing to GitHub, getting a few more feedbacks afterwards as more edge cases came through. But that's a really good opportunity for us because usually when we announce a feature, all of those 60 SDKs, it could take days, weeks, or months for them to support those features. With Components v2, most of them had support for that feature either on the day that we launched or within days afterwards. And so that's a really good example of how you can build with instead of for your developer community. You're not just throwing something over the wall and hoping for the best. So my final thoughts here really is that this is not just a strategy. You really have to have a community and open mindset if you're going to be opening your docs. So I know that there's been a little bit of a cautionary tale here because I don't want you to think that it's just, again, opening the doors and then they will come, build it and they will come is not. This is not a field of dreams. We want to make sure that we are opening the docs with intention, and if you do so, that you're ready to show up to host the party when you do. So yeah, when you invite your users to contribute, you're essentially telling them that you matter, your insight is valued, and you're part of this project. But that invitation needs to be backed up with attention, resourcing, and care from your team. So thank you very much. I hope you learned a lot this week at Write the Docs, and thanks for hanging out to the last one. So thank you.
End of the day, we doubled our efficiency with the chair. The chair's coming out. Great way to end the afternoon. Colin, thank you again so much for having the time here to do Q&A. I've been part of a few projects to open source docs. We've seen the trend from unconference sessions as well as writing day where you're open sourcing docs. So I think this is an excellent topic for us to end the conference, where we've got quite a bit of engagement from folks on the Q&A. So we'll get into it.
Let's do it.
The top one here. Question about your roadmap. Is it public? Do you have to worry about leaking new features through some of the docs work, or is it kind of like user research?
Yeah, so that is probably the biggest point of contention. Like, there are memes and emojis of like soon TM trademark, is that we don't have a public roadmap at this time. It's something that we as DevRel have been like kind of fighting for, and so we definitely take in the feedback. We try to bring that back as much as possible to the developer teams, but it's always tricky because things get resourced differently, plans change. So that's like on the top of my list after generating our docs, to figure out how we can be bring more participation into the roadmap process.
Awesome, and like just improving transparency with it that way and getting.
Even if it's we can't do it or we're definitely not doing it, like it's better to have an answer or even just be heard than it is to just ghost and just don't say anything.
Now the question about the PRs and sort of engaging with the public. This question, are all PRs quote unquote cost effective? In that sense, what's the value of something that's like a typo fix? Or is this something that's like a gateway to further contributions? Or how does this fit into the way they're spending their time?
Yeah, so that one is definitely tricky. Like, using the automation is going to help catch some of those low value PRs. Like, usually we'll see, if we see a typo get fixed, then everyone else sees a bunch of typos, and then we get a whole flood of typo fixes. The idea is that we don't want there to be typos in the first place, so ideally using automation. Grammarly used to have an API. We've been looking at things that are like alternatives to that, because some AI is not necessarily good at with specific like grammar and things like that. So there's things like Hemingway and Grammarly and stuff like that. So yeah, to the actual question, like there are definitely things where the developers who know like we have a thing called sharding, where you really only need to do sharding if you're a bot of a certain size, and there's just a small subset of people who have ever done that. And so those kinds of things are high value if there's something that's broken and we need to tell the team, or they help write how to do a bot at scale, then that's great. If we're just constantly reorganizing how markdown tables are formatted, that's not high value.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like at that point, it's improving efficiency for your team, and you're going to prioritize those a lot more. With this next question, kind of more about like the market. Have you had PRs from your competitors?
Not that I know of. I think it's tricky because like Slack and other things aren't like true competitors, so it depends on like who our competitors are. I think the tricky thing is that like it's also not as easy to find. Like a lot of things are in Discord and are not as searchable as like a forum or something like that. And so like being in GitHub allows those to be more visible. And so it's possible that we have had changes from other folks. We've definitely had things that are like a bot framework that works in multiple, like Slack and Teams and things like that, where they also support Discord. And so they might see something that they do in Slack often and then recommend it or make a PR there.
In that case, may they open up an issue or something, right?
Yeah.
Next question here for the afternoon. How would you advise someone with limited time outside of full-time work, and they might not be sure about how to navigate this space of being open source contributing? How do they get started?
Yeah, for contributing, there's something, Hacktober is a really good way to get started. So in October, there's usually like a bunch of open source projects that actively go create issues that are like good first Hacktober things. And so sometimes it's code, sometimes it's docs. And I know there was like the Google season of docs, which is no more, but there's projects like that where honestly, if you start going through GitHub and search for like good first issue, things like that, those are really good ways to start. If you go find apps similar to ours that support open docs, there's almost always going to be something that can be done. So if you're looking to build your resume, create some experience so that when you do go interview, if someone comes through and they've been an active contributor in our docs and they're applying for a job at Discord, like that's an immediate thing that I would definitely want to point to.
Yeah, and to add on to that, if you're here for writing day, you can get hands-on experience with folks here who can help educate you on contributing to open source documentation. Everyone here is so awesome at educating and getting you like hands-on experience to do it, and that is on top of the network that you get here. So, and the wonderful plug, I'm like, if you're interviewing, then it shows up like, hey, I saw that you actually have these PRs. You've got commits in. That goes a long way in interviews. This next question, we have time for a couple more here. What do you do when you don't want to expose a certain doc update before publication? Updates that might have something sensitive or changes to pricing if something is like that.
Yeah, so thankfully we don't have any pricing or anything in the docs. What we do, so we actually had to do this for the game developer conference. We had a new SDK that we couldn't talk about until that day. And so we were under a press embargo. And it did mean we brought in a massive PR out of the blue, right? It was that is where we don't feel like we're working in the open when we have to do that. Components v2, that's not a secret. That's something people are excited about. So we can do that in the open. But with the new SDK that we released, I think it was 8,000 new lines, all in at once, and everyone's like, what just came in? It was a massive change. And because it was so big, we didn't get to have as much feedback in that process, and so we ended up with a bunch of downstream PRs after the big PR once the embargo lifted. So it is tricky, right? We're not an open source project, so having our docs in the open does mean maintaining that balance of when do we have to hold back some PRs and release them all at once and make marketing and PR also happy.
If it's a massive PR like that, who LGTM'd just 8,000 lines?
Yeah, so with that one, we ended up with a private repo with lots of small PRs into one PR. And so teams were seeing each thing individually, and then we rebased them all into one and just one commit, YOLO the whole thing.
I think it's a good segue here to this question, sort of more about process here. What did you have to do to prep the repo for open sourcing?
So it was open before I joined, so I can't speak to too much of that. I think it was open since day one, though. So the team that originally created the docs were very community focused. A lot of our engineers on the apps team came from the community, so that's another big plus one too. Just being part of these communities can turn into jobs because most of our apps developers were bot developers previously. So yeah, I don't know if there was anything specific because it was always open from day one.
You could probably look at the commit history.
Yeah, it goes back to, I think it's 2017 or so.
Awesome. Yeah. We're going to get the last question from a former speaker here. Yenjia asks, you mentioned setting clear expectations. How do you decide which parts to open for contribution and which to reserve?
Yeah, so I think it's mostly if you know you want to make some things open, do you have time to actively be there and host? If you don't, you should not open it, right? And so if you have a lot of products, maybe start with one product. If it's or even a part of it, I think tutorials is a really good place for contributors because, again, with our example, most of our docs are all JavaScript code samples, but with no libraries. And I can guarantee you, of the 60 libraries, they would all love their code samples in their SDK. And so, depending on how many SDKs, how many languages do you allow, maybe your team isn't experienced in Python, so you might have people submitting, this is the true Python way, this is the Ruby way, this is the Rails way, things like that. So those kinds of things where maybe you're not an expert at it, but you know that there are people who want to contribute. And then, again, balancing that value is that it can't be just we don't have resourcing, so we're going to try to get the community to do it for free. It needs to be backed up by resourcing on your team as well.
Yeah. What an incredible way to end the party here.
Yeah.
We've got Colin, appreciate you and your time here today. That is it for our presentations today at Write the Docs. Everyone, round of applause.
Thank you.